The emergency room was cramped, thick with smoke from the warehouse explosion still clinging to the patient's clothes. A teenage boy was wheeled in, severe burns, charred skin, gasping for breath. The doctors panicked. "We don't have the right equipment," a young nurse pushed forward, eyes fierce with determination. "I'll try to keep him alive." With trembling hands, she began procedures that weren't in any hospital protocol. The boy's breathing steadied. The room fell silent. Hours later, she received her notice, terminated. The next morning, her phone rang. A world-renowned surgeon was calling. Her name was Emily, 27 years old, still new to the profession. Brown hair pulled back tight, thin frame, eyes that held patience most people had lost. At Metro General Hospital, Emily was invisible. The veteran doctors treated her like a glorified assistant. During rounds, they'd talk over her, dismiss her observations, move on before she finished speaking. One colleague sneered during a shift change. "Don't dream about becoming a doctor. A nurse is always just a nurse." Emily never argued back, never demanded respect. She just worked, harder than anyone else. She stayed late wiping down beds that didn't need wiping, reminded patients to take their medications on schedule, quietly bought small toys with her own money for the children in the pediatric ward. The dismissal was constant. When Emily raised concerns about safety protocols in the oxygen storage area, the head physician waved her off. "Don't try to teach us our job." She'd noticed the ventilation system was faulty. The temperature controls were malfunctioning. She filed a written report that went straight into someone's desk drawer. 2 days later, the warehouse next to the hospital exploded. The shockwave ruptured gas lines. Fire spread fast. The emergency room flooded with casualties. Emily rushed in with the trauma team, ignoring the risk, the smoke, the chaos. She was needed. That was enough. The most critical case arrived on a gurney at 9:43 p.m. A teenage boy, maybe 16. Third-degree burns covering 40% of his body. His airway was swelling shut. His skin was black and peeling. The trauma team froze. They weren't equipped for this. The burn unit was in another wing, but the boy wouldn't survive transport. "We need to intubate now," a resident shouted, fumbling with equipment. Emily stepped forward. "Let me help." Dr. Richardson, the supervising physician, barely looked at her. "This isn't your place. Stand back." But Emily saw what they didn't. The boy's throat was closing. Every second mattered. Traditional intubation wouldn't work. The tissue was too damaged. She'd read about alternative methods, field protocols used in war zones, techniques that weren't taught in American hospitals because they weren't standard. Emily's hand moved to her pocket, touching the folded paper she always carried. Her father's last note to her before he died serving overseas as a combat medic. The words were faded but burned into her memory. "Never walk away when someone needs you." She made a choice. "Dr. Richardson, we need to try a cricothyrotomy. The standard airway won't." "Absolutely not. We follow protocol here." The monitor's alarm shrieked. The boy's oxygen levels plummeted. Emily looked at the dying teenager, then at the doctors arguing about procedure. She knew what her father would do, what she had to do, even if it cost her everything. In her locker, beneath her spare scrubs and emergency supplies she packed herself, was a worn notebook. Inside were handwritten notes, sketches, protocols she'd copied from military medical journals. Techniques most civilian nurses never learned. Methods her father had once shown her during late-night conversations when she was still in nursing school. "These might save someone's life one day," he'd said. "Don't be afraid to use them." Emily had studied those pages until she could recite them from memory. She never thought she'd actually need them, until tonight. The boy's lips were turning blue. His chest barely moved. Emily stepped forward, ignoring the protests. She had seconds to act. Emily's hands moved with precision she didn't know she possessed. She grabbed sterile gauze from the crash cart, rolled it into a makeshift airway channel. The attending physician shouted something, but the words didn't register. There was only the boy, the failing monitor, the ticking clock. What are you doing? Stop! Dr. Richardson reached for her arm. Emily sidestepped, her focus absolute. She irrigated the burn wounds with sterile saline, not the standard burn solution they couldn't access fast enough. Her fingers worked to clear debris from the airway using a modified technique she'd memorized from field surgery manuals. Another doctor lunged forward. "You'll kill him!" But Emily could see what they couldn't: the tissue response. The subtle color change as oxygen began reaching the boy's brain again. The chest rising slightly, then again. She used eye irrigation solution to flush the burn areas, an unconventional choice that made the resident gasp in horror. But in field conditions, in emergencies, when the right supplies weren't available, medics improvised. They used what they had, and it worked. The monitor's frantic beeping slowed, steadied. The oxygen saturation climbed from 62% to 70, then 75. The boy's chest rose and fell with more strength. His color shifted from deathly gray to pale pink. The room went silent. Every doctor, every nurse, every technician stood frozen, staring at the monitors in disbelief. Emily's hands were shaking now, adrenaline crashing through her system. She stepped back, blood and saline staining her scrubs. The boy was breathing, stable, alive. Dr. Richardson's face was ashen. "What did you just do?" "I kept him alive," Emily said quietly, "until we could get him to the burn unit." An hour later, the boy was transferred upstairs, his condition upgraded from critical to serious. The burn specialists were stunned he'd survived the initial trauma. Emily sat in the break room, exhausted, hands still trembling. That's when her supervisor appeared in the doorway. Behind her stood the hospital administrator and two members of the medical board. "Miss Collins, we need to speak with you, now." The meeting lasted 20 minutes. Emily barely heard most of it. Words like gross violation of protocol, unsanctioned procedures, liability, and reckless endangerment washed over her in waves. She tried to explain. The boy was dying. Traditional methods wouldn't have worked. She'd used techniques that were proven effective in emergency field medicine. "This isn't a battlefield," the administrator said coldly. "This is a hospital. We have procedures for a reason." "But he lived," Emily whispered. "He's alive because you're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Emily walked to her locker in a daze. Security guards flanked her like she was a criminal. Other nurses watched from doorways, some with pity, others with barely concealed satisfaction. As she packed her belongings, her friend Sarah rushed over. "Em, I can't believe this. You saved that kid's life." "It doesn't matter," Emily said, her voice hollow. "I broke the rules." Sarah helped her carry boxes to her car. As they loaded the trunk, Sarah noticed the worn notebook that had fallen from Emily's bag. She picked it up, flipped through pages of detailed medical notes, diagrams, protocols written in Emily's precise handwriting. "Where did you learn all this?" Sarah breathed. "My father," Emily said. "He was a combat medic, died saving soldiers in Afghanistan when I was 20. He taught me that sometimes the textbook answer isn't the right answer. Sometimes you have to trust your hands and your instincts." Sarah turned to a page marked with a paper clip. A photograph was tucked inside. A young Emily in civilian clothes, standing beside a distinguished older man in surgical scrubs. The man had kind eyes and silver hair. "Who's this?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Dr. Adrian Keller. He ran a workshop on emergency field medicine 5 years ago. My father made me promise to attend before he deployed. Dr. Keller taught us techniques they don't cover in standard nursing programs, said they might save lives someday." Sarah stared at the photo, then at her friend. "Does he know what you just did?" "Why would he? I'm nobody, just a fired nurse who couldn't follow the rules." Emily drove home in silence, her entire career crumbling around her. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the boy's face, the gray color of near death, then the pink flush of life returning. She'd saved him. She knew it. But it had cost her everything. The next morning, social media was buzzing. Someone had leaked the story. A hashtag started trending, "Fire the hospital, not the hero." Former patients posted testimonials about Emily's kindness. Medical students debated the ethics of protocol versus outcome. The story divided the healthcare community, but Emily didn't see any of it. She'd turned off her phone, unable to face the humiliation. Until it rang at 9 a.m., an international number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Miss Emily Collins?" The voice was accented, European, authoritative. "Yes? This is Dr. Adrian Keller. I'm calling from Geneva. I understand you saved a burn victim yesterday using a modified cricothyrotomy and field irrigation protocol." Emily's breath caught. How did you? "The internet, Miss Collins, is remarkable. I saw the video someone posted from the ER. Your technique was flawless. Where did you learn it?" Tears streamed down Emily's face. "From you. 5 years ago, you taught a workshop. My father made me attend." There was a long pause. "Then, your father was Thomas Collins, the medic. You remember him?" "I remember everyone who saves lives. Your father was brilliant, and so it seems are you." Emily couldn't speak. "Miss Collins, I'm assembling a team for high-risk surgical interventions in conflict zones and underserved areas. We need people who can think fast, improvise, and put patients before paperwork. Would you consider joining us?" Emily stared at her phone in disbelief. "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a purpose. These hands of yours, they're rare. Don't let small minds cut them down." Within hours, Emily's phone exploded with messages. News outlets wanted interviews. Medical journals requested statements. The hashtag "Fire the Hospital, Not the Hero" had gone viral, reaching millions. But Emily ignored all of it. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at Dr. Keller's contact information, barely believing the conversation had been real. At Metro General Hospital, chaos erupted. The hospital's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Patient advocacy groups called for investigations. Medical ethics boards questioned the decision to terminate a nurse who'd clearly saved a life. The teenage boy's parents appeared on the morning news. "That nurse, Emily Collins, she saved our son when everyone else froze," the mother said, tears streaming. "They fired her for having the courage to act. What kind of hospital punishes someone for saving a life?" The segment went viral. Shares multiplied. The story jumped from local news to national headlines. Inside Metro General, the administrators held emergency meetings. Legal was involved. Public relations was scrambling. The board of directors demanded answers. Dr. Richardson sat in his office, watching the news coverage with growing dread. He'd been the one to report Emily's protocol violations. He'd insisted on her termination. Now the world was calling him a coward. Meanwhile, several doctors who'd witnessed Emily's work began speaking up privately. Dr. Sarah Chen, a young resident, posted a detailed thread on Twitter explaining exactly what Emily had done and why it had worked. Her post included medical citations and field research supporting the techniques. "Emily Collins didn't break protocol recklessly," Dr. Chen wrote. "She applied advanced emergency medicine that most of us never learned. She saved a life we would have lost, and we punished her for it." The medical community was splitting into factions. Some defended hospital protocol as essential for patient safety. Others argued that rigid adherence to rules could cost lives. But the facts were undeniable. The boy was alive, recovering, and expected to make a full recovery. Without Emily's intervention, he would have died. 3 days after her termination, Emily flew to Geneva. Dr. Keller's surgical center was unlike anything she'd seen. State-of-the-art equipment mixed with supplies meant for field deployment. Doctors and nurses from a dozen countries collaborated on complex cases. Dr. Keller met her in his office, the same kind eyes she remembered from 5 years ago. "Miss Collins, welcome. I've been following your story closely." "I'm still in shock," Emily admitted. "I thought my career was over." "Your career at that hospital was over," Keller corrected. "But your real work is just beginning. Tell me what made you use those techniques. Most nurses wouldn't have even known they existed." Emily thought carefully. My father always said that medicine isn't about following rules blindly. It's about saving lives by any means necessary. He taught me to study everything, to prepare for the impossible, to never walk away when someone needs help. Keller nodded slowly. Your father understood something many doctors never learn. Medicine is both science and art. Sometimes the textbook answer isn't the right answer. Sometimes you have to trust your training and your instincts. He gestured to a wall covered with photographs, faces from around the world, disaster zones, war-torn regions, rural villages with no infrastructure. This is where we work, places where there are no protocols because there's no infrastructure, where improvisation isn't optional, it's survival. We need people like you, people who can think under pressure and act decisively. Emily's eyes widened. You want me to work in conflict zones? I want you to work wherever you're needed most. Our team deploys to natural disasters, epidemics, war zones. We save lives that the medical establishment has written off. It's dangerous. It's exhausting. And it's the most important work you'll ever do. He paused. The question is, are you ready? Emily thought about the boy she'd saved, about her father's sacrifice, about the years she'd spent being dismissed and underestimated. When do I start? Keller smiled. Tomorrow. But first, we're doing a press conference. The world needs to hear your side of the story. The press conference was held the next morning. Dozens of journalists packed the room. Cameras from major networks lined the walls. Dr. Keller spoke first, his reputation giving weight to every word. I've spent 40 years in medicine. I've trained thousands of doctors and nurses. And I can say without hesitation that Emily Collins represents the best of our profession. She saved a life using advanced techniques that most medical professionals don't even know exist. Instead of being celebrated, she was fired. He gestured to Emily. This is what courage looks like. This is what medicine should be. And I'm honored to have her join our team. Emily stepped to the microphone, her hands steady now. I didn't act to be a hero. I acted because a 16-year-old boy was dying, and I had the knowledge to save him. My father, who was a combat medic, taught me to never walk away when someone needs help, even if it costs you everything. Her voice grew stronger. I don't regret what I did. I'd do it again, because at the end of the day, saving a life matters more than following a rule. The room erupted with questions, but Emily's message had landed. Back in the United States, the response was seismic. Medical schools added field emergency protocols to their curricula. Hospitals reviewed their rigid policy structures. Patient advocacy groups pushed for reforms protecting healthcare workers who improvise in life or death situations. At Metro General, the administrators faced a full investigation. Several board members resigned. Dr. Richardson issued a public apology, admitting he'd prioritized protocol over outcome. The teenage boy Emily saved appeared on television with his parents. I'm alive because of her, he said simply. She didn't give up on me when everyone else did. The family started a petition demanding Metro General reinstate Emily and reform their policies. Within a week, it gathered over 500,000 signatures. But Emily had already moved on. She was in Geneva, training with Dr. Keller's team, preparing for her first deployment. On her last night before leaving for a disaster zone in Southeast Asia, she sat alone in her temporary apartment and pulled out the worn photograph of her father. I hope I made you proud, Dad, she whispered. I didn't walk away. And for the first time since her termination, Emily smiled. If you believe saving lives matters more than protocol, type life first. Emily's first deployment was to a refugee camp on the Thailand-Myanmar border. Thousands of displaced families lived in makeshift shelters. Medical supplies were scarce. Infrastructure was non-existent. Disease spread rapidly through crowded conditions. It was exactly the kind of place where Emily's skills mattered most. Working alongside Dr. Keller's team, she treated burn victims from cooking fires, performed emergency procedures with limited equipment, and taught local health workers advanced techniques they'd never learned. Her hands, the same hands that had been called reckless and dangerous, saved dozens of lives. Back home, her story continued to ripple through the medical community. Medical students started calling themselves Emily's Army, a grassroots movement advocating for more comprehensive emergency training and nursing programs. They argued that protocol was important, but adaptability was essential. Nursing schools across the country began incorporating field medicine workshops into their curricula. Dr. Keller was invited to speak at major universities, and he always mentioned Emily's courage. "She represents what healthcare should be," he told auditoriums full of aspiring nurses. "Knowledgeable, brave, and willing to act when others freeze." The teenage boy Emily saved, whose name was Marcus, recovered fully. The burn unit specialists called his survival miraculous, but they knew the truth. Emily's immediate intervention had prevented the catastrophic complications that kill most severe burn victims. Marcus and his family became advocates for healthcare reform. They spoke at conferences, lobbied legislators, and shared their story with anyone who would listen. "Emily didn't just save my life," Marcus said in interviews. "She showed me that there are people who will fight for you even when the system won't." At Metro General Hospital, the aftermath was painful but necessary. The hospital implemented sweeping reforms. They created a new protocol allowing healthcare workers to deviate from standard procedures in life-threatening emergencies, provided they documented their reasoning and outcomes. They called it the Collins Protocol. Several doctors who'd witnessed Emily's termination pushed for her reinstatement. The hospital offered publicly, with a formal apology and a significant raise. Emily's response was gracious but firm. "Thank you, but my place is with Dr. Keller's team, where I can use everything I've learned to help people who have nowhere else to turn." The nursing community embraced her as a symbol of what their profession could be. Not just assistants following doctors' orders, but skilled practitioners capable of independent critical thinking and life-saving action. Nurses across the country shared their own stories of times they'd been dismissed, ignored, or punished for advocating for patients. Emily's experience gave voice to a systemic problem. Professional nursing organizations used her case to push for greater autonomy and respect for nurses in hospital hierarchies. Slowly, institutions began to listen. In refugee camps and disaster zones, Emily worked tirelessly. She documented her techniques, wrote training manuals, and taught other healthcare workers how to improvise when resources were scarce. Dr. Keller watched her with pride. "You remind me why I became a surgeon," he told her after a particularly grueling day. "Not for the prestige or the salary, but to save lives no one else can reach." Emily's father would have been proud too. She was living the philosophy he died for. Serve without hesitation, save without counting the cost. 6 months into her work with Keller's team, Emily received a letter from Marcus. He'd been accepted to medical school. He wanted to become a burn specialist. "Because of you," he wrote, "I know what kind of doctor I want to be. The kind who acts when others hesitate. The kind who puts the patient first, always." Emily pinned the letter to the wall of her small room in the medical compound. On difficult days, when resources were scarce and challenges seemed overwhelming, she'd read it and remember why she'd chosen this path. The medical journals that had initially criticized her actions began publishing research on field emergency protocols. Studies showed that in resource-limited settings, improvisation and adaptation were often the difference between life and death. Emily's techniques were being studied, refined, and taught. What had gotten her fired was now being recognized as cutting-edge emergency medicine. Dr. Sarah Chen, the resident who defended Emily publicly, joined Keller's team 6 months later. She found Emily treating patients in a tent hospital after an earthquake in Nepal. "You inspired me," Sarah said simply. "I couldn't keep working in a system that punishes people for caring too much." Emily smiled. "Welcome to the team." The movement that started with one nurse's courage was growing. More doctors and nurses were questioning rigid protocols, advocating for patient-centered care, and demanding that institutions prioritize outcomes over procedure. Emily remained humble throughout. She avoided most media attention, preferring to let her work speak for itself. But when young nurses reached out asking for advice, she always responded, "Learn everything you can, study beyond your textbooks, trust your instincts, and never ever walk away when someone needs you." The boy she'd saved was alive. The medical community was changing, and Emily had found her purpose. She'd lost a job but gained a calling. If you think courage is choosing to act when others hesitate, comment courage. The lesson from Emily's story cuts straight to the heart of what healthcare should be. Systems and protocols exist for good reasons. They protect patients and provide structure. But systems can also become rigid, bureaucratic, and blind to individual human needs. Sometimes true healing requires someone brave enough to break the rules. Emily didn't act recklessly. She acted with knowledge, skill, and courage when conventional approaches would have failed. She proved that compassion and competence together can achieve what rules alone cannot. Her legacy spread far beyond that one teenage boy's life. Dr. Keller incorporated Emily's case into his international training programs. He taught thousands of medical professionals that protocols are guidelines, not commandments. That sometimes the right medical decision lives in the gray area between textbook theory and desperate reality. Medical schools reformed their emergency medicine curricula. Field protocols and improvisation techniques became standard training. Future healthcare workers learned that knowledge without courage was incomplete, but courage without knowledge was dangerous. Emily represented the perfect balance. The Collins Protocol, adopted by Metro General, spread to other hospitals. Healthcare institutions began protecting practitioners who made sound medical decisions in emergencies, even when those decisions deviated from standard procedure. Nursing advocacy groups used Emily's story to push for greater professional autonomy. Nurses weren't just doctors' assistants. They were skilled practitioners whose judgment and expertise deserved respect. Marcus, the teenage boy Emily saved, became a burn specialist as promised. He revolutionized emergency burn treatment protocols, always citing Emily's techniques as foundational to his approach. Years later, he established the Thomas Collins Fellowship for Emergency Medicine, named after Emily's father. It funded training for healthcare workers willing to serve in disaster zones and conflict areas. "Emily saved my life," Marcus said at the fellowship's launch. "Now I'm helping create more people like her. People who act when others freeze. People who put patients before policies." Emily continued working with Dr. Keller's team for years, deploying to the world's most dangerous and underserved places. She trained hundreds of local healthcare workers, leaving sustainable medical knowledge in communities that desperately needed it. She never sought recognition. She avoided awards ceremonies and turned down speaking fees. Her reward was simpler and more profound. Lives saved, communities strengthened, hope restored. When journalists asked about her motivation, Emily's answer never changed. "My father taught me that medicine isn't about prestige or protocol. It's about showing up when you're needed and doing whatever it takes to help." The medical community's conversation shifted because of her. The old debate between following protocol and doing what's right became more nuanced. Healthcare leaders acknowledged that sometimes these weren't opposing choices, but different paths to the same goal: saving lives. Emily's story reminded everyone in healthcare why they'd chosen their profession. Not for the salary or status, but for the privilege of helping people in their most vulnerable moments. The teenage boy who'd almost died became a successful doctor. The nurse who'd been fired became a legend. And the father who taught his daughter to never walk away received the highest honor. A legacy continued. 10 years after that night in the emergency room, Emily returned briefly to the United States for a medical conference. She was invited as a keynote speaker, though she'd initially declined. Dr. Keller convinced her. "They need to see that doing the right thing doesn't destroy careers. It transforms them." Standing before hundreds of healthcare professionals, Emily spoke simply and directly. "I got fired for saving a life, best thing that ever happened to me, because it led me to work that actually matters, to places where my skills make real differences, to people who see healthcare workers as partners, not subordinates." She paused, looking across the sea of faces. Don't wait for permission to be excellent. Don't let fear of consequences stop you from doing what you know is right. Medicine needs brave people more than it needs obedient ones. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Emily's story proved that sometimes losing everything leads you exactly where you need to be. That courage isn't about avoiding consequences, it's about accepting them for something bigger than yourself. One nurse, one decision, one life saved, and a legacy that changed how the world thinks about healthcare, courage, and the cost of doing what's right. If you believe silent heroes deserve to be remembered, subscribe to The Veteran Story. We share real stories of real courage, not mass-produced content. Real people, real sacrifice, real inspiration, because these stories matter. These heroes matter, and they deserve to be told by humans who care.